All right, so today I'm going to do an 11 by 15 inch watercolor. It's a little bit large for me. Usually I do 7.5 by 11 inch. That's my go-to size for plein air watercolor. But today, working at home, I'm going to experiment painting a little bit bigger. I'll be painting on Arch's watercolor paper, and it is cold press paper. I'll be using a smaller painting as reference. This is a 7.5 by 11 inch plein air watercolor that I did out at Lindemar and Pacifica, and so I'm going to use this as my reference. And you can see the difference in size here. So this is the 7.5 by 11, and this one is 11 by 15 inch. So this was painted on an 1/8 sheet of watercolor paper, and this is going to be painted on a 1/4 sheet. The full sheets are 22 inches by 30 inches. As for my watercolor palette, I've sort of mimicked the colors that I have on my oil palette. So basically a split primary palette. In other words, I have a warm and cool of each of the primaries, but then I've also added burnt sienna, and then I have a tube of white gouache as well. For my blues, I've got Winsor Blue Green Shade and French Ultramarine. For my yellows, I've got Winsor Yellow Deep and Winsor Lemon. For red, I've got Scarlet Lake, and then also Permanent Rose. This one is a Cotman color, which is made by Winsor & Newton, but it's their student line of paint. And then, as mentioned, I've got burnt sienna and a tube of white gouache. I don't use the gouache very often, but it is helpful when I need an opaque white to either fix a mistake or to add a highlight onto something. And these are the brushes I plan on using. A number 6 Princeton Neptune, which is right here, and then a number 12 Princeton Heritage. I use inexpensive plastic palettes. This one is 5 by 10 inches when closed up, and obviously double that when it's opened. And this one's like roughly 4 by 8, and this one has a little extra mixing area right here. But this is the palette I'm going to use today. I use this when I'm painting at home. But when I'm plein air painting, I will use this one, or if I'm traveling, I'll use this one just because it's so compact and lightweight. Honestly, this one is not bad at all. It's not, once it's closed up, it's pretty small. You can see, compared to my hand, it's not very big. And of course, because it's plastic, it's really light. And so I have squeezed out fresh paint along the top here, and then there's some leftover paint down here from previous paintings. Usually when I'm painting plein air, I do not squeeze out fresh color. I'm just using colors that I previously loaded and let dry. I've had problems with re-wetting some of the colors, in particular this Permanent Rose, which is the Cotman color, and I'm hoping when I get the Winsor & Newton, either quinacridone, magenta, or Permanent Rose, that I'll have a little bit better luck re-wetting the paint. I've got water in a small spray bottle here. I picked this up at Sephora. Anyway, I spray my dried paints to reactivate them. Just a little spritz. I plan on mostly using the fresh paint, but I've reactivated these just in case. I've done a light pencil sketch of the composition, and then I tape down the paper to a 14 by 18 inch panel. And I just use regular masking tape. I'm mixing a color for the dark portion of the clouds. I'm using ultramarine, a touch of burnt sienna, and then a little bit of the Permanent Rose to push it towards purple. I've actually turned the composition upside down, and I'm going along the edge of the mountains here, the top edge. And I am not going to do a complete wash. I'm going to do a partial wash, trying to keep the paint application fast and spontaneous. All right, now I'll turn it around. And this is the dark portion of the clouds. And I'm going to come in at the top and do the sky color, but I'll be leaving some light portions along the top of the clouds. As you can see here on the original, that's what I did, and left some unpainted portions. For the blue part of the sky, I've got a mixture of the ultramarine blue and the Winsor Blue Green Shade. And honestly, painting and filming a watercolor is not easy for me. But I am just playing around, and I thought it could be fun to share my process with you guys. And I'm keeping my brush somewhat dry. I'm going to introduce a little bit more color into the sky here. Okay, so there is the sky. So to recap, I first painted the dark portion of the clouds, but I did flip the paper upside down so that I could get a nice edge along the top of the distant cliffs and not have it bleed down into the cliffs. So I have sort of a hard line here, and since I was painting it upside down, the paint flowed in this direction. Then I kind of softened some of the edges, came in with the blue sky, but left some little bits of light, some little bits of unpainted paper. I mixed up a purple color here using ultramarine blue and permanent rose. This is for my wet sand. I'm trying to keep this line here irregular because that's where the waves are breaking. And I've got a sand color here. I need to apply this quickly so that I can get a nice blend. I want a soft edge between the purple and the sand color. I'm actually enjoying painting on this larger surface, adding a bit of burnt sienna to the sand, especially along the bottom here. Right now that the clouds are done and the sand is done, I'm setting it in the sun to bake or just dry for a few minutes. For the water, I'm starting out with some Winsor Blue Green shade and a touch of Winsor Yellow Lemon. I'm going to leave unpainted areas of white water along the cliffs. And this brush might be a little bit too big for the job. Now I've switched over to the smaller brush. One of the big challenges in painting plein air watercolor or painting outdoors like I am right now, the paper dries so quickly. Okay, while the paper is still wet, adding a bit of the lemon yellow. And you can see here how it's spreading nicely with soft edges into the existing blue-green that I laid down. I think I need to reinforce this water line a little bit. Back to the big brush, and this mix is primarily burnt sienna and some rocks along the bottom. I've dried my brush, pick up a little bit more burnt sienna, adding some additional color while the paper is still wet. I added a bit of red for these distant cliffs here. So that there's a little bit of a shift between the distant cliffs and the cliffs that are up close. For the distant hills, I'm going with almost pure ultramarine blue. First sketching out the top of these hills. I can tell actually that I need more color. Needs to be darker. This part over here is pretty good. This section is dry, so I'm going over with a slightly darker color for the rocks in this area. There's another rock out here. Trying to keep the rocks on the shoreline here spontaneous. All right, so here's what I finished up with. I decided to put a few ripples in the foreground, and then I also darkened up the distant hills. It's really hard to hold the camera and film the process the way I do when I paint in oils. In the future, it could be good to have somebody film for me. That would be helpful. Decided to do the same composition and not film the process so I could focus on the painting process. I think this one came out better as far as the paint application goes. There's only one problem area right here where I sort of messed up, but everything else I was able to do on the first pass. All right, so I hope you guys enjoyed this video. Let me know what you think in the comments. If you'd like to see some extra videos and help support the channel, there's a Patreon link down below. There's also a PayPal tip jar down below, so check it out. Other than that, stay creative. I'll see you guys in the next video.